completely unacceptable from Sydney Colson. So, if you guys don't know, this is Sydney Colson on Threads. Sid Colson is a former teammate of Sophie Cunningham and a former teammate of Caitlin Clark and a former teammate of the Indiana Fever. She is comedian, and she has gone basically off the rails. Not off the rails, sorry. She has joined the sisterhood again.
Now, I want you to pay extremely close attention and watch that shift in energy unfold right before your eyes. Because what we're seeing here isn't simply casual, everyday commentary anymore. Not even remotely. This is someone who is visibly, undeniably furious.
You got opportunities because of this organization. You got opportunities because of the like Caitlin Clark brought on your head. You did. You benefited from it. You joined the Indiana Fever for those benefits. You took those benefits. You became more notorious. And as soon as you leave, you rejoin the sisterhood. Then it's against Caitlin Clark. And you are celebrating a player getting taken out. You are in a much more like looking fragile position in what you say.
And we're witnessing someone who's about to draw a massive line in the sand. A line that, quite frankly, she absolutely cannot uncross once she steps across it. Just recently, Sydney Colson posted something on social media that has completely set the internet ablaze.
And someone who is on TV and who has not already essentially villainized Caitlin Clark for, I'm going to be real, getting assaulted. You villainized Caitlin Clark. You villainized a former teammate for getting assaulted, and got called out directly by that player, and now you're doing this. This is unacceptable. And whatever TV network brings Sid Colson,
leaving the entire WNBA community completely frozen in their tracks and asking one incredibly serious question. Does she really just publicly celebrate an act of physical violence against her own former teammate?
But at the same time, you know, she's complaining that the players making money now aren't speaking out about things. And like what? What you mean speaking out about things? The whole trans players. I'm being very fucking honest here. We've heard it in tennis. Every single player at the top in tennis has agreed with what they've done. The population of people.
Because here's exactly what makes this situation completely different from every other petty social media dust-up or dramatic feud we've watched unfold throughout this entire season. You have to remember, Sydney Colson isn't just some random fan account firing off hot takes for engagement. These are no longer just issues.
The current issue is the trans issue, which I can guarantee you there's a reason why the vast majority of players in this league are not going after Sophie Cunningham. Because the vast majority of players in the WNBA probably agree with her. The vast majority of players in the WNBA probably agree with her. Statistically, the odds of what I'm saying being correct is very high. There is a reason why Sophie Cunningham's teammates and players on other teams liked the post where captioned, "I said what I said."
She's absolutely not some anonymous internet troll hiding safely behind a keyboard in her basement. She is a legitimate WNBA player, someone who physically shared a locker room and breathed the same air as Caitlin Clark.
Colson is there posting this. And I think it's embarrassing because this is inciting violence. It just is. And I get it, it's a joke. I get it. Sid Colson's trying to be funny here. I get all of that. I get it. Sid Colson, but that is what.
Beyond that, she's a well-established media personality, someone who literally appears on national television to professionally break down basketball games. And yet, she just publicly, openly joked about a dangerous play where Clark was literally clotheslined straight onto the hardwood. So, what exactly was the post in question that ignited this entire firestorm?
I was a 5-time national shot put medalist as a kid. Of all things to say, that's not the one insult. In high school, I was like a 55-foot thrower. That's the one thing you can't say about me. But yeah, it's just one of those things now where I'm like, there's things you can't say when you're a player in the league. There's things you can't say when you're a pundit. There's things you can't say when you're a former teammate of these players. And I still, as far as I'm aware, technically I don't think she's even retired. Telling people what she can and can't say. Obviously, sorry, she can say whatever she wants. But like, she's probably gonna lose her job because of it. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, she's incited violence. She joked about violence against.
It was a simple laughing emoji sent as a direct response to someone explicitly referencing the infamous Alyssa Thomas incident. And trust me, you definitely know the exact one I'm talking about. We're taking it back to July 2025, that incredibly tense Fever versus Sun game where Thomas caught Clark with a brutal forearm straight to the neck that sent the rookie completely sprawling across the court. This wasn't merely a regular foul. This was the exact play that had the higher-ups at the league office actively reviewing the broadcast footage for potential suspensions and severe discipline. And yet, Sydney Colson genuinely thought that specific moment of physical pain was funny enough to engage with and publicly validate for all her followers to see. That is the critical, undeniable context that absolutely everyone needs to understand before we dive any deeper into this mess. But here's the thing that really gets me. This isn't even Colson's first time publicly commenting on the entire Caitlin Clark situation. Let's rewind for a second. Do you remember right after Clark took that massive hit from Thomas? Colson was sitting right there on national television within just a matter of days, and she was essentially calling Clark soft for how she reacted to taking a blow like that. Now, sure, she might not have used those exact verbatim words on air, but trust me, the underlying implication was crystal clear to anyone watching. Think about how wild that is. A player gets hit in the neck with so much force that the entire league office has to step in and review the tape. And Colson's big professional television take was basically that Clark just needed to stop complaining and toughen up. Now that we have that history established, let's really talk about the highly suspicious timing of all of this unfolding right now. To truly grasp the irony here, we need to remember that Colson was officially signed by the Indiana Fever back in 2024. That means she was physically right there, an active part of that very organization during the exact same chaotic period when absolute Caitlin Clark mania was fundamentally transforming the entire DNA of the franchise. We're talking about watching the Fever go from a team that was sadly playing in front of mostly empty, sparse crowds to suddenly becoming a massive cultural phenomenon that was completely selling out massive arenas every single night they touched the floor. Almost overnight, they went from being a total afterthought in mainstream WNBA media coverage to abruptly becoming the absolute most watched, most talked about team in the entire league by a country mile. Let's be completely honest here. Every single player who happened to be sitting on that roster massively benefited from the unprecedented wave of attention that Clark brought with her. And if we're looking at the facts, Colson benefited more than most of her peers. Because of that skyrocketing spotlight, she suddenly received way more mainstream media opportunities. She secured significantly more high-profile podcast appearances, and she gained a tremendous amount of new visibility and reach for her personal online comedy content. The Indiana Fever essentially became an unavoidable media magnet, pulling in cameras and reporters from everywhere. And absolutely everyone who was even remotely associated with the team got pulled right into the center of that blinding spotlight, including Sydney Colson herself. But here's exactly where the narrative starts becoming incredibly complicated and messy. Just recently, Colson made a very specific comment while appearing on a podcast, essentially complaining about how WNBA players historically used to actually stand up for meaningful causes, but suddenly, now that the league is exploding and they're finally making real money, they've all conveniently gone completely silent on important social issues. During that interview, she specifically went out of her way to mention the highly controversial trans athlete debate, a massive topic that has deeply divided the league's fan base ever since Sophie Cunningham stepped forward and made her very public comments regarding biological males competing in women's sports. And look, let's be fair for a second. Music. There is absolutely a very real, legitimate conversation to be had about the intersection of professional athletes and social activism, and whether reaching new levels of financial success ultimately changes a person's willingness to bravely speak out on controversial subjects. But when you look closely at Colson's specific framing of this delicate issue, it instantly reveals something incredibly important about exactly where she personally stands, music, and more importantly, exactly who she has chosen to align herself with behind the scenes. Think back to when Cunningham first posted those highly debated comments regarding trans athletes actively competing in women's professional sports. The collective response from the rest of the WNBA players was honestly incredibly revealing in its own right. The vast majority of them simply chose to remain completely silent and stay away from the crossfire. Sure, a select few players quietly double-tapped and liked the post that featured the caption, "I said what I said," but if you look at the context, they weren't necessarily endorsing the political message itself. In reality, they were mostly just casually acknowledging their peers' photos without wanting to dive headfirst into the toxic discourse. It's pretty obvious that the vast majority of the league didn't rush to the microphones to publicly condemn Cunningham, primarily because, statistically speaking and off the record, most female athletes probably share some underlying version of her serious concerns regarding long-term competitive fairness. But instead of recognizing that nuance, Colson is aggressively framing this collective silence as outright cowardice. By portraying this narrative as players eagerly selling out their deeply held principles just to secure the bag and make more money, she's essentially arguing that the entire league has completely lost its moral compass, simply because these players absolutely refuse to publicly attack Sophie Cunningham, or loudly speak out on this one highly specific, incredibly polarizing issue. And honestly, that highly critical framing instantly tells you everything you need to know about exactly which side of this heated debate Colson is proudly standing on. Now, with all of that established, we really need to sit down and talk about what Colson and others continuously refer to as the sisterhood. Make no mistake, this is a heavily loaded term that gets casually thrown around all the time in inner WNBA circles. And the crazy part is that it can mean wildly different things depending entirely on exactly who happens to be saying it at the time. Sometimes, when you hear people invoke the sisterhood, it's genuinely about building strong solidarity among women fighting for respect in the difficult world of professional sports. Other times, it's much more exclusive, mainly functioning as a shield where established veteran players strictly protect each other from outside criticism. And then sometimes, exactly like what we're seeing play out right in front of us in this specific case, it's essentially a code word for a very particular tight-knit group of players who have actively and intentionally positioned themselves entirely against Caitlin Clark and absolutely everything her massive presence represents for the future of the game. Let's be crystal clear about this. The particular version of the sisterhood that Colson is so proudly referencing right now is not welcoming, and it isn't inclusive in the slightest. It is incredibly exclusive and guarded. It's entirely made up of these specific players who openly resent the unbelievable, record-breaking amount of media attention that Clark effortlessly receives every time she breathes. It's the players who deeply resent the harsh reality that a brand new rookie is single-handedly driving television ratings and league revenue in massive, historic ways that those veterans, despite years of hard work, simply never could. We're talking about the veterans who genuinely feel deep down that Clark simply hasn't earned her superstar status yet, strictly because she hasn't had to suffer and pay the exact same exhausting, grinding dues that they did for the last decade. And the wildest part of all this is that Colson just publicly, loudly rejoined that bitter group after literally spending months securely employed by the fever, after directly lining her own pockets and benefiting from the undeniable financial boom of the Caitlin Clark effect. And after having a front row seat to watch firsthand exactly how Clark's electric presence completely transformed that entire struggling franchise. Yet, the absolute second Colson left the team, she immediately turned around and started taking calculated shots from the sidelines. Think about the massive escalation we've witnessed here. First, she gets up on national television using her broadcasting platform to essentially call Clark soft for taking a brutal hit. Then she pivots over to long-form podcasts, heavily suggesting that her peers are cowardly selling out their core beliefs just for a bigger paycheck. And now, music, as the grand finale, she is right out there on public social media, literally laughing at highlight reels of violently dangerous plays directed entirely against a woman who was just recently her own teammate. When you lay it all out like that, the underlying pattern of behavior here is absolutely unmistakable, and the toxic message that it continuously sends to the public is even clearer than ever before. To truly understand the gravity of her recent podcast claims, let's get incredibly specific for a moment about the Julie Tatar situation, especially since Colson herself deliberately chose to bring it up in this highly charged context. For those who might not know the backstory, Tatar is a transgender athlete who is currently competing in professional basketball overseas in France, playing specifically at the country's second-tier competitive level.